Good morning, everyone. Here's an update for August 29th surrounding Ukraine. Biggest news, obviously, is Ukraine has launched its counteroffensive in the Kherson region. They're trying to reverse some of the gains Russia made in that city and potentially even take that city back entirely. A senior Ukrainian government advisor confirmed that the operation began and has been ongoing for the past 6-7 hours or so. This is phase two of the operation, though. The first phase has been the past 2 months, where Ukraine has repeatedly fired upon Russian positions with their HIMARS, with the artillery, etc., to try and weaken positions, destroy logistics lines, destroy weapons and ammo depots, disrupt communication, etc. This assault has been long anticipated. A lot of people have said that it wasn't going to happen, but obviously it has, and it started this morning. The key to this effort obviously has been the deployment of Western weaponry, such as the HIMARS, truck-mounted guided missiles, as well as advanced artillery, intelligence, etc. It's increased Ukraine's ability to strike far behind enemy lines, thus pinning them further from the front lines and what defensive positions they could have created. Ukraine's Center for Strategic Communication and Information wrote on its Twitter account that the Ukrainian armed forces had breached the first line of defense near Kherson, which is quite a significant effort because Russia has reportedly been building up defenses in that area for the past 2 months. So to have breached them so rapidly is a significant victory for Ukraine. Now, the United Kingdom Ministry of Defense, as well as former U.S. Army Europe Commander Ben Hodges, and the Ukrainian government themselves all believe Ukraine has a real chance to get back these occupied territories, especially consider the very successful use of such Western weaponry against the Russian military. Russian officials obviously are downplaying the extent of Ukraine's counterattack, with some conflicting claims about its scale, what's going on. Officials from what's on ground plus what's coming out of the Kremlin are not jiving. So obviously trying to determine what exactly is the truth, or whatever the Russian truth is, has been somewhat difficult for the Kremlin. Sergei Askionov, who is the Moscow-appointed governor of Crimea, wrote on Telegram that the latest counterattack was actually just a fake Ukrainian propaganda. There's no counterattack. The Ukrainians are taking extreme losses, etc. But there's a lot of signs showing that Ukraine is actually getting closer to population centers. Russia's began evacuating Kherson of Russian people. The RIA Novosti, the Russian media outlet, has ordered civilians to be evacuated into bomb shelters, preparing for inevitably what would be a movement into Kherson by the Ukrainians. In fact, intercepts from the Russian-backed Wagner mercenaries are communicating with Russian commanders confirming Ukrainian advances, and they're trying to form a defensive front. The messages say Ukrainians have advanced nearly 6 kilometers into Russian territory and retook a few villages. Now, Wagner mercenaries go on to say that north of Kherson, a Ukrainian attack was repelled, but Ukraine continues to attempt to flank Russian positions in that area. The expectation is that Ukraine will mount a very strong attack and push these Wagner/Russian forces back, but they're unsure if Russia will lose Kherson. Although Ukraine is advancing, they are facing strong resistance, as a defense tends to have the advantage on the battlefield. But Ukraine has more forces, better equipment, and a stronger will to win, obviously. Now, the fact that we are even talking about a counteroffensive is impressive. The idiot Russians on various social medias will move the goalposts yet again if Ukraine sees any success in this counteroffensive, when in reality this operation went from a 3-day operation to take down the government of Kyiv and be welcomed with open arms, to a 3-week operation where the overwhelming forces of Russia would win, to what has become a stalemate, to now become really Putin's bloody quagmire in the region, and now Ukraine is on the offensive. I mean, what a significant turn of events for Russia. There's no one out there on the planet that can seriously say this is successful for Russia. The fact that it went from a 3-day show up, welcome with open arms from the Ukrainians, to now Ukraine is seeking to drive Russia out as the dominant force in the region. So Russia's image is massively tarnished, and they have gained very little from it. Also, for consideration, if Ukraine gains control of Kherson, it can strike targets in Crimea, and with the addition of anti-ship weapons, can threaten nearly the entirety of the Black Sea Fleet. That would mean that the Russians would have to either depart the Black Sea entirely or risk being sunk by the Ukrainians. This is humongous. This is a humongous drive, and right now it seems like Russia is using only Wagner Group fighters to try and defend it, which is a very bad proposition. The Wagner Group fighters said that they do have some of the Black Sea Marines in reserve in case they're needed, but we'll see how that goes on moving forward. I'll keep an eye on this. When the maps actually start updating, I'll try and do a map update, but on the various OSINT sites that I use, they're not updated yet, with good reason. This just started, and obviously when you're in the middle of a battlefield, you don't want to start mapping movements and stuff like that. So we'll see when that happens. Maybe in a couple days we'll update this. Moving on away from the counteroffensive, the International Atomic Energy Agency is sending a mission to Zaporizhia. Finally, the Russians have agreed to allow this to take place basically the international community saying, let us do this, or there will be sanctions on their nuclear programs in Russia, which would be pretty devastating, considering they export a lot of their nuclear program around the world, but rely on Western equipment for such things, specifically out of the United Kingdom, Canada, and Great Britain, the United Kingdom, Canada, and the United States. Good news is that the IAEA will be able to view that site. Hungary is in talks to grow its reliance on Russian supplies of gas from Gazprom, which obviously the big stab in the back country that Hungary is. They're meeting with Russia over the next few days to try and increase its gas supplies because Russian gas is obviously cheaper, but they have no regard for what the Western world likes, or what the Western world is trying to accomplish here with Russia. So I guess fuck you, Hungary, not Turkey. I read Turkey right here, but fuck you, Hungary. Moving on, Denis Prokhorov, the commander of the regiment of Belarusian volunteers in the Ukrainian army, met with the media and said that the idea of Belarus joining with Russia in the fight against Ukraine would probably not happen, saying he doesn't think the Belarusian military would go far. He goes on to say that the military would likely either collapse, disorganize, or go over to the Ukrainian side with grave consequences for the Lukashenko regime. He himself, Lukashenko, understands this. He understands that this is what's going to happen. His power rests on the backs of military, but the Belarusians and the Ukrainians have very close relations, closer than Russia and Ukraine. So they're basically brothers across many arenas, and so the Belarusians are very much opposed to what's going on in Ukraine in secret, although they never will come out entirely and say so. He went on to speak about the possible return of this unit that's of volunteers that's fighting in Ukraine to Belarus to potentially unseat Lukashenko. If Ukraine were to gain the upper hand and even win in this situation, the implications for Putin are stark, but also Lukashenko, because the problem is Lukashenko is stuck in a position where his people are more sympathetic and friendly to Ukraine, like I said, so they're more unwilling to fight Ukraine. So Lukashenko needs Russia to win, but he cannot send troops to help. And if Ukraine wins, it's just another strike against authoritarian dictators. And the commander of this regiment, this Denis Prokhorov, has said that Belarus has maybe 3,000 troops that are of combat-ready status. The rest are just conscripts, poorly trained, poorly equipped conscripts, which is kind of what we've seen coming out of Russia. And the reality for Russia is they want to use conscripts out of poor areas. They want to use Wagner Group, etc., because using the more wealthy, the more well-to-do, not even wealthy, but even just the average person out of Moscow or St. Petersburg is going to cause an uprising. And I showed a map a long time ago that showed that the majority of the fighters in Ukraine are coming not from Moscow or St. Petersburg, but from everywhere else. In fact, it's nearly zero, because that's where the uprisings would have But that's what's going on. I'll keep an eye on this counteroffensive. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.